If Columbus was indeed a secret agent, then this is the smoking gun. But we rediscovered it in the archive of the Indies in Seville.
On May 20th, 2006, a team of geneticists confirmed they had positively identified the remains of Christopher Columbus. But that was just the beginning.
There are different theories about the origin of Columbus. And besides that, we also have a lot of references to compare DNA, genetic data that could be interpreted by historians.
The DNA tests on Christopher Columbus's remains just revealed something historians never expected. They uncovered a genetic link to a group of people he was supposedly completely separate from. This wasn't just a clue about his family tree, it was a shocking secret that recasts the man from a heroic explorer into a figure of immense mystery, perhaps even a fugitive hiding in plain sight. Who was the real Columbus? Columbus's story supposedly begins in the bustling ports of the 15th century, a world of merchants, sailors, and rival kingdoms. The traditional narrative, the one we all learn in school, says he was born in Genoa, Italy, to a humble wool weaver's family. He was a man of modest means who rose to global fame through sheer determination. But from the very beginning, historians have noted that something about his story never fully lined up. To put it mildly, the official account is full of holes. For starters, Columbus spoke and wrote in Spanish and Portuguese, but strangely, never in Italian. Think about that for a second. The man who was supposedly a proud Italian never wrote a single letter in his native tongue. He used archaic turns of phrase, spellings, and idioms that were completely out of place for someone raised in Genoa. What many overlooked is that even his handwriting didn't match what was typical of his supposed homeland. These weren't small details, they were massive red flags, clues that pointed to a man who might not have been who he said he was. Over time, the theories began to multiply. Many people are crazy about this mystery. Some claimed he was Catalan, hiding his origins because of the political dangers that came with it. Others said he was Portuguese, perhaps even part of a covert mission to mislead Spain's rivals. A few whispered that he was from the Greek islands, or that he came from a noble but disgraced Spanish family. Each theory tried to explain why the world's most famous explorer went to such lengths to obscure his own beginnings. The mystery only deepened when historians found that even his name wasn't consistent. He signed letters as Cristoforo Colombo, Cristobal Colon, and even under cryptic signatures that resembled secret codes. But the real strangeness wasn't just in the inconsistencies, it was in the silence. For a man whose journeys were so well documented, his early years are shrouded in shadows. There are no first-hand accounts of his childhood, no clear records of his education, and no unambiguous proof linking him to the family that supposedly bore his name. It is as if Columbus appeared in history fully formed, stepping onto the stage of the Spanish court with maps, ambition, and a destiny already written, but no traceable past. Some scholars believe this wasn't an accident. You see, during the time Columbus lived, Europe was a dangerous place for anyone of Jewish descent. The Spanish Inquisition was in full force, forcing thousands of families to convert to Christianity or face being driven from their homes. People with new Christian ancestry, known as conversos, often changed names, altered family records, and erased their origins to survive. If Columbus was among them, then secrecy wasn't a choice, it was survival. His relationships reflected a pattern of guardedness. His correspondence avoided personal details, and his journals were written with a tone of self-censorship, as if he was aware that someone someday might scrutinize every word. When he appealed to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand to fund his voyage, he spoke with a curious mix of humility and authority, describing his mission as guided by divine inspiration. It was as though he was always balancing two lives, the explorer he wanted the world to see and the man he could never fully reveal. The trail of riddles he left behind was just the beginning of the story. The Converso Connection. As the centuries rolled on, the legend of Christopher Columbus became set in stone, yet the man himself seemed to slip further into the fog. Each attempt to trace his footsteps before 1492 hit the same wall of silence. For a figure of such global consequence, there should have been records, birth certificates, apprenticeship logs, school records, or at least local references in Genoa's archives. But what researchers found instead was a void, a deliberate absence that suggested a past scrubbed clean. In the archives of Spain, Portugal, and Italy, historians uncovered fragments that hinted at multiple identities. There were contracts signed under names that sounded like Columbus but weren't quite the same. Letters to the Spanish court carried his signature, yet even those signatures were odd, filled with symbols, crosses, and abbreviations that some cryptographers later described as quasi-Masonic. When decoded, they appeared to conceal religious allusions rather than simply confirm his identity. Scholars began to wonder if the man was intentionally building a paper trail that confused rather than clarified. One peculiar habit stood out: Columbus's refusal to speak openly about his parents or birthplace. In an age when noble lineage mattered, when even the humblest seafarer could elevate his standing by boasting of ancestry, Columbus remained silent. When questioned, he deflected or shifted focus to his divine mission. In his writings, he described himself as chosen by God to open the West to Christendom, yet never described where that calling began. Some historians have suggested that he wasn't practicing modesty, he was protecting something, that something may have been dangerous knowledge. Here's where the rabbit hole goes deeper. In 1492, Spain had just forced its entire Jewish population to leave under the Alhambra Decree. We're talking about an estimated 80,000 people forced to flee or convert to Christianity overnight. The inquisitors kept meticulous lists of converts, tracking family trees across generations. Anyone suspected of concealing Jewish roots could lose their property or worse. If Columbus had any connection to that oppressed ancestry, revealing his true origin could have cost him everything, including royal patronage and his life. And there were clues that pointed in that direction. Columbus's letters included Hebrew references, and some scholars believe his use of Old Testament imagery was unusually fluent for a man raised in a Catholic environment. In his notes, he sometimes wrote the Hebrew letters Bet and He, used in Jewish blessings. He also displayed knowledge of Jewish festivals and calendar systems, noting lunar cycles in ways that aligned with Hebrew tradition. These might have been coincidences or traces of a hidden heritage that refused to disappear. His timing didn't go unnoticed either. Columbus departed on his first voyage just days after the final deadline for Jews to leave Spain. While ships full of refugees fled Iberia, his own fleet sailed from Palos de la Frontera under royal commission. While one world was ending for thousands, Columbus was unknowingly, or perhaps deliberately, beginning another. There are also peculiar connections among his closest allies. Several of the financiers who backed his voyage were conversos. The same network of merchants and scholars helped manage his funding. It seemed as though Columbus moved comfortably among people who had every reason to hide their origins, suggesting he may have understood their situation far too well. He lived his life expecting betrayal, constantly paranoid about who was reading his letters. In one surviving writing, he warned that men will judge me falsely. For hundreds of years, the physical evidence of who he truly was remained locked away in a cathedral vault in Seville. But what would happen when modern science finally opened that vault? A genetic quest. The turning point came when history met science. For centuries, scholars could only debate Christopher Columbus's origins through letters and disputed documents. But in the late 20th century, a new frontier opened up: genetics. Suddenly, the secrets might be hidden not in ink or parchment, but in bone dust. And deep beneath the marble floor of Seville Cathedral, those bones waited. In the early 1990s, Spanish geneticist José Antonio Lorente began an unprecedented project to extract DNA from the remains believed to belong to Columbus. The thing nobody tells you is how massive this challenge was. Not only were the bones centuries old, but they were fragmented, brittle, and possibly mixed with others. Over the years, the remains had been moved multiple times, a journey of thousands of miles across the Atlantic, between Spain and the Dominican Republic, creating confusion about which set was authentic. Both countries claimed to have the true remains of the Admiral of the Ocean Sea. Lorente's mission was to find out which claim was real and what those bones might reveal. The project took decades. Lorente and his team carefully compared DNA samples from the remains in Seville with those of Columbus's known relatives, including his son Hernando and his brother Diego. It was a painstaking process requiring the latest techniques in ancient DNA analysis. The samples were so delicate that contamination from a single fingerprint could ruin the results. For months, the lab remained sealed and sterile, with every sample logged and preserved under controlled temperatures. Finally, a breakthrough came. The DNA extracted from the Seville remains matched that of Columbus's family line. The bones, Llorente confirmed, were genuine. Seville, not Santo Domingo, held the true resting place of the explorer. But that discovery was only the beginning. Llorente wasn't just interested in where Columbus was buried, he wanted to know where Columbus came from. As genetic sequencing technology advanced, the team revisited the samples. They analyzed mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome sequences to build a genetic profile. Then they began comparing that profile against thousands of DNA markers across Europe, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and beyond. For years, the results remained inconclusive. The degradation of the DNA made it hard to get a clear match. Some markers seemed to align with northern Italy, others with the Iberian Peninsula. It was a genetic riddle that mirrored the mystery of Columbus's own life. But as newer methods allowed researchers to reconstruct missing segments, patterns began to emerge. And that's where things get really strange. The data didn't match what historians expected. Instead of clustering with Italian samples, Columbus's DNA showed a strong affinity with populations from the Western Mediterranean. Even more intriguingly, some markers were rare in Italy but common among families of Sephardic Jewish descent, the very same families that had been driven from Spain. To make sure the findings weren't a coincidence, Llorente expanded the study. Yet, no matter how many data sets they compared, the same pattern persisted. The genetic signals pointed away from Genoa and toward Iberia. Still, Llorente hesitated to announce anything. Ancient DNA can deceive, and such a revelation would upend centuries of belief. But whispers began to spread that the Seville lab had found something world-shaking. A truth hidden in the bones. When the findings were finally unveiled, the announcement sent a chill through the world of history and science alike. What DNA analysis uncovered about Christopher Columbus's origins will leave you stunned. For generations, the story of the Italian dreamer had been accepted as fact. Yet the genetic evidence told a very different tale. The research team in Granada confirmed what most scholars had long questioned. Columbus's DNA did not align with that of Genoa or northern Italy. His Y chromosome profile, inherited through the male line, didn't fit within the Genoese genetic clusters. Instead, the sequences showed a much stronger connection to populations from the Western Mediterranean, specifically areas tied to Spain's Sephardic Jewish communities. These were the families that had lived in Iberia for centuries until the Alhambra Decree of 1492 forced them to convert, flee, or face the ultimate penalty. The genetic markers found in Columbus's remains, according to reports, were compatible with Sephardic Jewish ancestry. The phrase may sound clinical, but its meaning was profound. It suggested that Columbus might not have been the Catholic Italian explorer from the history books. He could have been a converso. This was shocking, adding an entirely new dimension to Columbus's mission, one that might have been rooted in desperation rather than divine destiny. The idea immediately triggered a storm of reactions. Supporters pointed out that the timing was almost too perfect to ignore. Columbus set sail on August 3, 1492, just days after the final deadline for Jews to leave Spain. The expulsion ships carrying exiled families left the same ports from which Columbus launched his voyage. Could it be that his journey had another meaning entirely, perhaps a secret hope for refuge beyond the reach of the Inquisition? There were more connections. Many of Columbus's early backers were themselves conversos. His interpreter on the voyage, Luis de Torres, was a converted Jew who spoke Hebrew and Arabic. His personal physician was also from a family known to have Jewish roots. His entire circle included people who had survived under false identities. What once looked like coincidence now looked like deliberate choices. Some historians began reinterpreting Columbus's own words. His frequent references to Old Testament stories and his coded way of writing all gained new significance. Even his strange signature was reconsidered, with some linguists suggesting it might have been a disguised acrostic prayer. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Skeptics argued that DNA cannot reveal religion, only ancestry. The team's cautious phrasing, compatible with, left room for uncertainty. But others countered that the convergence of genetics, timing, and historical behavior made the conclusion difficult to dismiss. The Catholic Church remained silent, and the governments of Spain and Italy avoided comment. The Genoese wool weaver's son might never have existed. The explorer who carried the cross on his sails might have done so not from devotion, but from necessity. If Columbus truly descended from a Jewish line, it reframes his entire legacy. His pursuit of a new world might have been driven by a desire to escape an old one that had turned on him. So, was Columbus a hero or a man forced to hide a dangerous secret? Let us know your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden history.